Perfect. Much appreciated. First off, guys, welcome. Thank you for being here. We're going to be spending about an hour to go through quite an extensive agenda. Without further ado, I'm going to kick things off. I think I've met most people. If not, I'm a cybersecurity CSC alongside Ryan and a few others that should be joining as panelists as well. The agenda will be quite comprehensive. This is our first of many Fridays Firepower Hour, hopefully. I got to be candid. When I thought about doing this, the goal is not to travel as much and to have, make sure people benefit from getting more information about firepower. A lot of our customers have firepower, and they typically don't utilize more than about 30% of its capabilities. And I think if you're going to invest in Cisco security, I think the big goal for me and my team is to make sure you guys understand the capabilities and can leverage that to the full capacity. I really appreciate a big kudos to Ryan Firth, my colleague who's here to help with the Q&A. So please use the Q&A panel for all your questions. The advantage is everyone sees them and everyone sees the answer, and I will share these Q&A with everyone who attends this session. The good news is I've only got like 300 slides to go through. No, just kidding. Only like 3 slides to go through, and then I'm going to jump into, this is going to be 100% live walking through configuration, explaining as we go through. This is not a 101, and it's not a deep dive. It is focusing on exactly what we're seeing on the screen right now. Discovery policy, how to set that up, the benefit, the net result of a discovery policy, which will be our host profiles. And I'm going to come back and look at the host profiles a few times throughout this session. I'm going to build an intrusion policy. I'm going to link to it a variable set, explain what variable sets are. There's different options when it comes to setting up your variable sets. I'll tell you what I like to do in my lab environment, but that does not imply it's the way to do it in your environment. We'll leverage firepower recommendations now that we've got network discovery. And now what we're going to do is I want to trigger an intrusion event, an impact flag 1, and I'm going to configure an Nmap remediation to go ahead and scan my whether my source or destination. I think I'll do both based on what happens in order to get more visibility into what potentially might have happened on an endpoint, and just to get more visibility. And it's also going to build my host profile. And then lastly, I'm going to go in and tune the IPS rule based on a false positive, right? So here is my network topology, and believe it or not, all this runs on my laptop. Now, the good news is I don't need to have all these VMs set up today. The only VMs I need are the following. So I've got a core router, and north of the router is my 133 network. I've essentially got 2 hosts on that network. I've got a Linux box. I've got a Windows 7 box. Their IPs are .10 and .100 respectively. And south of my router, I've got a inline virtual NG IPS, and that is the .10 network. And I've got 1 server and 2 Windows boxes. So this is a Windows 2008 server running a variety of different services. I've got a Windows 7 that's joined to the domain, as well as just a Windows 7 not joined to the domain, a standalone. So the goal for today is to run the FMC, which is running 6.2.3, managing my virtual NG IPS, which is equally running 6.2.3. I'm going to configure my network discovery policy running from my corporate Cisco laptop, which is Piazzi WS02. And then I'll configure my network discovery. We'll look at the host profiles of all the IPs on my network and kick things off from there. And again, if you have any questions, please post that in the Q&A, and we'll go from there. Thank you. So let me go ahead and don't save. Let me pull up my UI. So this is my firepower management console. So the first thing we're going to address is looking at my network discovery policies. I'm going to go to Policies, Network Discovery. In my case, it's already configured, but I'll tell you what the default settings are and why this is the first thing you're going to want to change. So when this comes out of the box, it's going to have all quad zeros. So that means all the traffic going through all my firewalls are actually going to go into my Firepower Management Center's database. So that's a good thing, but not a great thing if these are public IP addresses. I'm not trying to discover the internet. I want to discover my internal network. And the other key thing to understand is out of the box, it's only discovering applications and not your host. So if I click on this, this is the only thing that's discovering, and here it's going to be quad zero. So what I've done is I created actual objects by clicking on this green plus, gave it a name, gave it a network range or an IP or a CIDR value, saved it, and then I was able to use this. So in my network, I'm using 5 distinct networks, the 133, the .10, the .1, my management, which is the .111, and a testing network, which is the .50. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel this so that we can retain hosts and users. And I'm going to go to the Advanced tab, and I'm going to call out a couple of things which are really important. Under my general setting, I've modified the capture banner by enabling this from being disabled to being enabled. The advantage is if you run applications like an IIS, there's a banner that displays. We can capture that to provide better fidelity to identifying what the version of that application is. So FMC can use that. The second thing I've enabled is identity conflict. So by default, this is disabled. And when I enable it, I have one of 3 options, right? The automatically resolved conflict. So passively, it is discovering traffic as it goes through the firewalls. When I do an active, that means I'm going to perform some kind of a scan, whether it's an Nmap built into my FMC or my sensors, or from a third-party vulnerability scanning software that I'm going to input via a host input API into my FMC. So I'm going to keep this disabled so that you can actually see what it looks like and how you can resolve this manually. The third thing that I've done here is I've modified the settings for my network discovery data storage limits, which is the default of 10,080, which equals the 7 days. So I'm going to keep my host profiles, my server or port applications, and client applications for 7 days. If I don't see information from an IP, from a server port that's open, or from a client application, I will remove it after 7 days. So in my lab environment, I bump this up to 4 weeks. So let me cancel this. So once you've configured your network discovery policy, you've got to deploy this. It goes to all my essential firewalls, so you can't really configure this on a per firewall. It goes everywhere. So let's go look at my host profiles. So this is under Analysis, Host, Network Map, and this should show me all the IP addresses on my network. So as I expand this, I did not have any IPv6 objects defined or addressing with objects defined in my discovery policy, so therefore I am not discovering IPv6, but you could. So from here I could expand. I'm going to pick on the 10.10 because that's the box I'm going to try to hit with a vulnerability scanning using Kali afterwards. So let's go ahead and click on that IP address. This should spin and display the content of what Firepower has discovered, right? So first off, I know this is not accurate. It thinks it's a load balancer. It has identified that the administrator is logged in. You guys can actually see already that this is an Nmap scan. That's how we discovered this is a Windows 7. So if you haven't not configured Nmap yet, or any type of host input API tie-in, then the source should say fireside or firepower. So this is the net of having that discovery policy that says to detect identity conflict or a conflict, but don't resolve it. So this is if I click on the magnifying glass, it should come back and tell me, I'm guessing the first one here will be fireside, and then the RPC will be my Nmap, and sure enough, right, it's confirming that this one here is defined by firepower, but the Nmap provide a bit more information. So from here, I could say, you know what, let's keep this one versus the other. And the only reason I don't have it to resolve conflicts automatically, it removes the ability for me to demonstrate this. I want you to pay real close attention to a couple things. Number one is servers. These are the actual ports that this box is listening on, right? It comes back and it shows me 4. Scrolling down, these are the client applications and who's logged on, so we can see the admin has been logged on as of today at whatever time that is. And so this is what we refer to as a host profile. Before we move forward further, I'm going to go look at my intrusion policy, intrusion events, and I want to make sure that there are no intrusion events. So I'm going to change my time for making sure we're looking at only the last 1 hour. So let's go ahead and click on that time, and there should be a preset I can click on that says look for the last 1 hour. There it is. I'm going to apply. And I know I don't have any intrusion events. That's always a great thing. Now, before we move forward, I'm going to go to my objects, and I'm going to look at my variable set. The reason I want to go look at my variable set is when I go configure my intrusion policy and I need to deploy that, when you deploy intrusion policy, it's going to have a corresponding variable set. Snort rules do not have actual IP addresses. They come in with variables, and then these variable sets define the values of the variables, right? So this is out of the box what comes with your firepower. And if I look at external network, it's set to any IP address. If I look at my home network, what it is that I'm trying to protect, you can see it's any IP address. If I go to modify this and I'm going to say my internal network that I'm trying to protect, let's just say it's my DMZ, and I'm going to include that. As soon as I do this, it actually moves it out from the default to a customized variable, which implies you've given it a value, right? So it's no longer just a default setting. If I want to revert, I should click on this to reset back to the way it was. So with that said, I've actually created a DMZ variable set, and in here I've given values to my home net. So my home net includes my DMZ. If you recall the topology, I'm going to deploy this on my virtual NG IPS, and that is essentially protecting the .10 network, that 192.168.10 network. And then I'm going to treat anything that is not my home net as my external net. So I don't care even if you're coming from my corporate network, which is the 133 network, the 192.168.133, even if you're coming from that subnet, and I see traffic that triggers an intrusion rule, I want it to flag, because if you're not in the DMZ, I'm going to treat you as an outside. So what I've done is I've taken my home net and added that to my excluded network. So it basically implies it's anything except for my home net. And the reason I do my home net is if, let's say, I build another network south of my virtual NG IPS, call it the .20 as an example, I can just go to my variable set to my home net and at the .20 network, and I don't have to do anything here because this is excluding the actual variable, right? And then the last thing I've done here is actually I specified, called out exactly what are the DNS servers IP addresses running on my network. There are snort rules that detect malicious traffic or activity going to DNS, HTTP servers, and so on. So in my case, I'm just modifying the, not just any, but specifically these IP addresses. So this reduces false positives and will improve performance. Let me cancel this. So far what we've talked about is configuring my discovery policy. We reviewed a host profile. I reviewed my variable set. So let's go in and configure an intrusion policy. So I'm going to go to Policies, Access Control, Intrusion, and this will take about a few seconds to load, but once it loads and I try to create a policy, this will take about 20 seconds once I try to edit this. So I'm going to call this my Friday Firepower Hour IPS policy. Actually, I'm going to go one step further. I'm going to call this my passive policy. So I don't want to be in blocking mode. So I could easily have my firewall in routed mode, inline mode, and I'm blocking everything. However, my IPS policy, I do not want it to block, right? So I want to log the traffic, I want to log the intrusion event, but I don't necessarily want to block it. So I'm going to go ahead and create and edit this policy. This is where this is going to take about 20 seconds to load up. And if you guys have any questions, please go ahead and post that in the Q&A while we're waiting for this to load up.
While we're waiting on that to load, some people are trying to get in, but the registration link is closed. If it's possible to reopen it quickly, then that would be good.
Let me, well, I think it closed 10 minutes before. That's the registration, but if they've registered, they should be able to get in.
Yeah, that's the problem. I think we have some people that did not register, but they wanted in. And the rest of the panelists, that's what happens in as well. But I don't want to take away from the seminar. So if it's not something that's quick, then no big deal.
Just bear with me. I'll see if I can do that real quick. No, it's grayed out. Cannot edit that anymore. Yeah, unfortunately, I can't do anything about that, Ryan. At this point, it's grayed out. The edit button is grayed out. That's too bad.
No worries. We got it recorded, so.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it.
And you bet. You bet. Again, so I've picked the balanced security connectivity. Why? Well, because it's really Cisco's recommended, but there's a lot more to it than that. So if you've attended a Firepower deep dive, that's covered. I actually will be covering this, not the next Friday's Firepower Hour, but the one after that, which will be an IPS deep dive. I think I'm going to call it everything you wanted to know about Firepower IPS, but we're too afraid to ask. So that's the session I'll be doing afterwards. So nonetheless, it comes with predefined rules that are set to drop. Some are set to generate events. And how do I know which is which? Well, it tells me here, but I can actually click on it. And this pre-populates a query in my filter bar, and I can actually view all these rules. I can come back to my policy info, click on the rule drops, and here we go. Here's all the rules. That X implies it's dropping, and a green arrow that's lit up means that it is set to just generate an event but not drop the packet. And if this was grayed out, that means that rule is disabled. So Firepower Recommendations leverages what we've learned on the network. If I go back to my host profile, let me open this up in a different tab. So basically what we're learning passively and what we're able to import through the host API, all these IPs, all these OSs, what we have are mapped vulnerabilities leveraging the vulnerability database. So let me go back to this host profile, and I'll scroll down to the very bottom, and you'll see a section that says vulnerabilities. So again, we still have 4 server ports And let me collapse these applications. Let me collapse these protocols. Let me collapse all the malware. And here's the 200 vulnerabilities that it's mapping based on what it seems from an application, from the operating system, and based on the vulnerability database that it's comparing it against. So when I come back here, when I do my firepower recommendations, actually it'll tell me what the recommendations are, right? And if the recommendation matches the rule action as what we have here, then we know the policy, the recommendation is applied in my policy. So let's go to my firepower recommendations, and I can do a couple things from here. I could just simply generate and use them immediately. I can generate and review before I use them, but before I do that, I can expand this, and I could say, well, rather than looking at the vulnerabilities on the .10 network, the .1 network, the .50, the .111, the .133, guess what? This IPS policy is only going to be protecting the .10 network, so only look at the hosts on the .10. So I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to say, you know what, just look for 192.168.10/24, right? So now I could toggle this. I'll cover that in the next session because I really want to go into great details when we talk about firepower recommendations. There's more to it than meets the eye, very much like the transformers. So I'm going to go ahead and generate and use the recommendations. And while that goes through, we'll come back and review what the net is from our intrusion policy. And again, this will take about 10 to 15 seconds to run through. Question to the audience. So far, so good. It's not like they can really answer. Right, Ryan? So while this is waiting, let me share with you, when I put this up together, I'm thinking if I can get 30 people to register, I'll be real happy, maybe 40. I had over 100 people register. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Appreciate it. Especially on a Friday afternoon. And the real reason I do this on a Friday afternoon, guys, is I travel a lot, so this is the safest day of the week and the safest time of the week where actually I will be available to run these sessions. I think we still need a few more seconds to finish up this recommendation and to set the rules in my intrusion policy. So far, I'm not seeing I just took a peek at the Q&A. I'm not seeing a lot of questions come up, which is always a good thing. That means they're getting it, or they're not paying attention, either or. So let's go back to my rules. So now you can actually see that the recommendations have been lit up, and it's actually matching what is in the policy today. So I'm going to go back to policy info, and I could see what this policy now has. So firepower recommendation, it modified 18,626 rules for 10 hosts. It actually took 6,200 rules, and it went ahead and generated a drop rule action. So now we're going to have better threat efficacy. Turned off 12,252 rules that I don't need, reducing false positives, and 174 rules to generate events. Let's go ahead and commit these changes, then we'll go ahead and apply this to my access control policy. Question. So I'll go ahead and answer this verbally, but I'll type it in so we can have this for the Q&A. So I am not able to get host information in network map. Is Nmap config mandatory? Negative. It is not mandatory. I use Nmap to further qualify and to get more information about a host. keep in mind, firepower recommendation waits for the traffic to hit a firewall. So Nmap can be used to Nmap to further define the definition of what we're seeing from the host. But also, let's say malware is executed on an endpoint, we could run an Nmap as a remediation to view anything that's changed on that endpoint from a prior to the malware execution. So you can use that in different combinations, right? So I'm going to come here and I'm going to modify my, so this is my IPS policy. So let's go down to my access control. And I do have a DMZ access control policy. So what I'm going to do is I've got a default rule that kind of a catch-all that I'm going to use this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify my intrusion policy from this DMZ IPS passive to my newly created Friday Firepower Hour IPS passive policy. And here's that DMZ variable set. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we're logging both so we can actually track this. I'm going to save. So my traffic will not hit any of these rules. It should hit my scrub all. Let's go ahead and save. And I will deploy. And here's my NG IPS. It says, yeah, you've modified your intrusion policy and the access control policy rule. Let's go ahead and check this box. Click on the deploy, and this should take maybe under 2 minutes. So let me come up here, check on this, look at the task, and let's just make sure that once this completes, we'll be able to proceed. So while this is running, I'm going to come back here to do a couple of things. So, and again, confirming we've got 4 server ports open. I'm going to go look at my intrusion events, making sure I don't have anything from an intrusion event in the last hour. So this is the last hour and few minutes, so that's good. So it's been, or not quite an hour, but yeah, an hour and a few minutes. So nothing there, so that's always good news. So let's come back here, and this will take a few more minutes. While we're waiting, let's come back to my access control policy. I can see it's out of date until this completes. Once it completes, then we will be in pretty good shape to continue with the testing. So just a bit of a primer. What I'm going to be doing afterwards is coming back to my Kali, and from there I will do a vulnerability scan against the 192.168.10.10. We'll see if that triggers a intrusion rule to fire, and if actually, before we do that, let me go in and configure my Nmap Scan. That's a good thing. I just thought of that. So I'm going to go to my policies, actions, and I'm going to go to my modules. So you should have, if you don't have this, let Ryan know. He'll fix it for you. I'm just kidding. You should have an Nmap remediation that's built in. These are one of the built-in modules that come with Firepower. So you should have the set attribute, PX Grid, the Cisco iOS null route, as well as the Nmap remediation. So I can click on this little magnifying glass. What this does, it allows me to create an instance. So it's no different than me coming up here and going to my instances. So there is one created, but I'm going to create another one. So I'm going to call this the, well, let's wait for this to pop up. I'm going to give this a name. This is my Friday Firepower Hour Nmap. And then I'm going to create specific remediations. So once I create the instance, underneath that, I can come in here and I want to go ahead and add an Nmap Scan. That's the only option I have for remediation. leveraging this module. And from here, I could then specify exactly what am I scanning, source, destination, both, how aggressive is my scan, what scan type is this, how aggressive is the scan going to be, you know, what parameters do we want. So I'm going to leave this. I'm going to call this my Friday Firepower Hour. I'm going to call this my scan source destination, right? And let me just fix that from here. So Firepower Hour scan source destination. I'm going to leave both scanning source and destination so that we can actually see what happens. Let's go ahead and create this. I'm going to click on the done once it comes back and says it's been created. Let me save it and done. So now here's, I'm going to configure a correlation rule and a correlation policy, and I want you guys to watch this. When we start talking about some of the things that a lot of people don't leverage, this is one of those key things. So I always tell people you don't configure this on day one, only because if you haven't done your IPS tuning, you're going to get a lot of false positives at first, meaning that whatever response you've configured, it's going to keep firing. So you don't want to create a whole bunch of remediation and notifications from day one until you've tuned your IPS policy, right? So I'm going to come here, I'm going to create a rule. And in this rule, I'm going to look for an IPS impact flag 1 event that triggers. So I'm going to call this my Friday Firepower Hour impact 1. I'm going to call it IPS impact 1. So I'm looking for an event that occurs, and that event will be an intrusion event. So I'm going to wait for this to load, and it's going to give me some rule conditions. So the first rule condition I'm going to use is if the destination IP is in my DMZ network, is in, that's the key thing, right? If you say is, it's a single IP, is in, I can now type in a subnet address. And I'm going to actually add another condition, and I'm going to change that operand from an AND, from an OR to an AND. So I want the destination IP to be in that subnet, but I also want my intrusion impact flag to be set at 1. So anything that's an impact flag 1, we know those are the worst of the worst. So if it's a 1, right, and the destination is in that subnet, let me go ahead and save that. So these are the conditions for the events that we're tracking. And now that we're tracking this, I'm going to create a policy, and I'm going to link the remediation with that rule. So when that rule fires, what exactly do we want to do? So I'm going to go to my policy management. I'm going to create a policy. And this policy name is my Friday Firepower Hour response to IPS impact flags 1. And then I'm going to add a rule. So now I'm going to say I want you to trigger when this rule fires, meaning all the conditions are met, and then I'm going to go ahead and link a response to that. This is not real intuitive, right? Because it says you don't have any responses, but really the response, you got to click on this little weird icon at the very end for the responses. So all the things I've configured, such as that Friday Firepower Hour scan source and destination, let's go ahead and add that as a response. I could actually have an email configured. I can have a syslog configured. All the above can then be added based on what I want. What do I want to trigger when this fires, right? So let's go ahead and update. I'm going to save. Now, the key thing when you save this policy, it's not actually turned on. You got to activate it. So I got to click on this little slide bar once, and you should see this spinning up here. And as it spins, it's going to come back and give me a checkbox that says it is now active. And this confirms if you've activated the policy. It's perfect. So recap, I've created a Nmap instance. I mapped a remediation, created a correlation rule that looks for intrusion events. And once we have an intrusion event that's an impact flag 1, saved it as a rule, create a policy that says when that rule fires, trigger that Nmap instance that I just configured. So now I could safely go back to my Kali. Here's Kali. So let me log into Kali. And let's see what is the IP address of Kali. So ifconfig. So this is 133.100, and I want to target 10.10. So let me go into my apps under my vulnerability analysis, and I'm going to pick, I'm going to use Nico. Let's go ahead and launch this. I'm going after host 192.168.10.10. So it runs, targeting port 80. While that's running, let me go back to my GUI. And I want to go and look at my intrusion events. And let me go look at my, well, there you go. So now I'm getting all these intrusion events coming in. Good news, I've got an impact flag 1, right? And that's what I was trying to trigger on. And notice my inline result, it says would have dropped. That's because of my IPS policy. I cleared that checkbox that says drop when in line. So that means the packet got through, and that's why I'm getting an impact flag of 1, and it lights up this computer in red, which means that you do have now an indication of compromise. So this is the old host profile. So let me refresh this and come back to 192.168.10.10. I should see indication of compromise due to intrusion events. So let me scroll down and pick 192.168.10.10. And let's wait for this page to load up. And once it loads up, actually, I'm going to go back and look at a couple things. Number one is I want to go look at my what's changed from an Nmap, and as well as whether Nmap is running or not, right? So first off, bingo, spot on. I'm actually triggering an IOC which was not there. The timestamp matches my timestamp. Let me go look at this and see if there's a task running for Nmap. And there you go. Actually, Nmap is running to both 133.100 and 192.168.10.10. So it is actually running, but it has not completed. And that's why I'm not seeing any new server ports listed. So we'll let that run. While that's running, I want to go look under my analysis, correlation, and I will look at correlation events. So let me open this up in a new tab, and I want to see if anything triggered. It should show that to me here as well. There we go, right? Here it is. Correlation event, source IP, destination IP based on an impact flag 1, and then the snort rule that fires. Great information, right? And here's the policy that triggered. Here's the rule, and we're getting this traffic from this firewall over these interfaces. Great visibility, right? Next thing I'm going to do is go back to my IPS policy. I'm going to click on this little down arrow because I want to drill into the source and destination IPs for only this one event, not all my events. I'm just going to click on that down arrow once. And then that should show me again the source and destination. And here it is, right? 133.100 to 10.10. So, I mean, I know this is a false positive. This is just a vulnerability scanning software that I use to scan my network with to discover vulnerabilities. It really is a false positive. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tune this snort rule, the 24,256, to not fire when we send traffic through the IPS. Again, I'll target 10.10 again, but I'm going to tune out this rule for specifically these two IP addresses, right? So while I'm doing that, let me just come back here and look at my tasks. And actually, Nmap ran. It took me about 1 minute and 52 seconds. So let me just come back here, right-click, and do a reload and expand and drill down to that 10.10 IP address one more time. Give it a few seconds for this page to load. And now actually I'm up to 6. It's actually running port 80, and it actually detected this additional port, which it hasn't defined the application, right? And if I scroll down to the very bottom, under my Nmap Scan, scan result 15. So this is the 15th different things that we've picked up from that scan. And if I go again to my policies, I'm going to go to my actions, and I'm going to go to my scanners. A couple things I'll point out is whenever you create an Nmap scan, it'll actually be visible from here as well. And one of the advantages, I could now do ad hoc scans if I wanted to, right? So here it is, the instance and the remediation. So I could actually come in and view my scan results. And from here, I could actually view that last Nmap scan I performed and what it actually saw, as well as download that information as well, right? So this is based on remediation. This is the last one I just did. I can view what it picked up as well as download that if I wanted to. So just, again, showing you that Nmap did run, what it saw on either one of those two IP addresses. So now I'm going to go back to my IPS policy. Let's go back to intrusion policy. Yeah.
I don't know if you mentioned this, but when there's a conflict between passive and active scanning, and the dangers of doing a single scan instead of a scheduled scan?
Yeah, so there's pros and cons for pretty much everything, but I think knowing ramifications the pros and cons is real important. The passive scanning, it's on 24/7. So I like that because I don't have to do anything. Firepower is learning about my network each and every time traffic goes through, right? So that's a given. However, when I can perform an external scan, whether it's a vulnerability scan or even Nmap, it does provide deeper and better fidelity. The downside, it's point in time. So if I scan once every 3 months or 2 months, it becomes stale information. So that's something you might want to have a regular cadence on. However, you don't want to overwhelm your network. Scheduling Nmap scans, I say be real cautious. Number one, it's going to be very network intrusive. It takes a long time. You don't want to be scanning all 65,000 ports for TCP and UDP. But one thing you can do is if I go back to my, I'm going to go back to a host profile to show you one thing you can do is that Nmap Scan button allows you to now perform an ad hoc scan. So let me come down here. I'm going to pick my domain controller as an example, which is the 10.11. And under the upper corner of its host profile, I will have scan host. So I can actually click on the scan, and which one do you want to scan with? I can pick this. So this allows me to go in and do better discovery of servers or hosts that maybe don't generate a lot of traffic that goes through the firewall. So therefore, we're not going to have a comprehensive visibility of that host, right? Did that answer the question kind of, sort of, Ryan?
Yeah, just wanted you to kind of cover the pros and cons of why you would do it, why you would be cautious, and also caution about the active scan information by default overriding passive. And the active scan, if you do it once, could be stale, where things could change and not be overwritten by your passive information.
Well, that's why in my case, I don't actually have one win over the other. I just create an identity conflict, and I go manually set that up. But you can certainly have the passive override active and vice versa if you wanted to. You sure can. So here's the snort rule, 24,256, right? So this is the snort rule I need to modify. So let's go to my intrusion rule. I'm going to go in and I'm going to type in 24. What was that snort rule again? 24. Yeah, I've got a great memory. 24,256. Let me show you this. 24,256. So I need to go in and make sure that that does not fire. So the only option I have from here is to check that rule, and I want to filter. So I could create a threshold or a suppression, but when suppression, it's for that entire rule. I don't want to suppress the rule because if that source is anything other than 133.100, well, guess what? I want that rule to still fire. So this is not really going to help me if I suppress the rule. So what I'm going to do, let me cancel this, and let me go to my policy info and discard changes. I want to back myself out from here, and instead what I'm going to do is go in and I want to create a new snort rule. So let me go into my object, intrusion rules, and I want to modify 25,254. So let me go to my local rules. These are the rules that I modified. Let me go in here. And these are the rules that I've modified. But I actually want to clone that 24,256. So let me go in and look at categories and see if I can actually search on that snort rule. Here it is. So what I want to do is actually I want to edit this. Now, anyone who knows snort rule knows that I cannot edit a Talos-defined snort rule. If you look at the very bottom, the only option I have is Save as New. So this creates a new snort rule for me. So what I'm actually going to do is modify the source IP from being my external net to 192.168.133.100. And in this case, I could leave it to my DMZ, my home net, whatever I want, but I want to make it real specific to only 192.168.10.10. And the most important part, I got to change this from alert to a pass rule, right? A pass rule is processed before an alert rule. So this is actually to preempt and let the traffic go through. So I'm going to scroll down now and do a Save as New. It's actually going to create a new snort rule, which will be numbered from the 1 millions and up. So from 1 million to 1,999,999 would be all the local rules or the rules that I create, right? Done. So I can actually see this is snort rule 1,000,011. Cool. So now what I'm going to do is go back to my IPS policy, and I'm going to go to that rule, and I'm going to enable it to detect traffic, right, to generate an event if it fires. So let's come down to my IPS policy. I'm going to filter on local rules, which is real easy to do. I'll show you how to do that. By the way, guys, me showing you how to filter on homemade created rules, that's included with the price of admission. We don't charge extra.
You're a good man, Paul.
You know, on a Friday afternoon, they're hanging in with us. We got about 6-7 minutes to go. It's the least I can do. Hey, guys, on the WebEx, if you click on the participants panel, you guys have a green check or a red X. If you guys are liking this so far, please give me a green check. At least I got 3. I'm happy. So I'm going to go to my intrusion policy. I'm going to go to rules. I'm going to go under categories, and there's something called local. So this is where all the local rules that we create come in. So from here, I'm going to look for that snort rule number 11, which is disabled. So I'm going to check that box, and I'm going to say I'm going to go ahead and generate an event when this rule fires. But remember that that rule has been set to a pass, right? So if I highlight the rule, I click on Show Details, and if I scroll down, the rule is actually set to pass the packet, not trigger based on the rule action, right? So the pass will preempt whatever I've defined here, right, which is to generate the event. So let's come back here. I'm going to commit my changes. I'm going to have to redeploy, and then I'm going to go and change my intrusion events view to the last few minutes because I don't want to see the old IPS impact flag 1, right? So once this saves, I will redeploy. While I'm waiting, let me come back here to my intrusion events. I'm going to change this to view only the last few minutes. And then I'll go back and run. So here's that impact flag 1, which again was from the last hour and a few minutes. So what I'm going to do is modify my time window to only look at the, I can't do a few minutes. Actually, you know what? Let me create a static time window where I want to start at today, but maybe I want to look at starting at 15:30 until 57. Yeah, that's for the last 27 minutes. Let's see if I do have any intrusion events. If I do, I'll just go ahead and remodify the start to start at a later time. But the point is, I want to start my window at a point where no intrusion events are going to be seen. So let me actually go back closer in time. So instead of 30, let's go make this 45. So this says in the last, make it 7 minutes. If you're wondering why would I look for 7 minutes, well, why not? While that's turning and churning, let's go back to my IPS policy. It is saved. Let's go and deploy, and this should come back and say that there's been changes to the IPS policy. Deploy. And while that's deploying, I'm going to come here. Perfect. That's exactly what I did not want to see, which is I don't want to see any intrusion events. So now we're going to wait that 1 minute and 30 seconds, 50 seconds, 17 seconds. And then I'm going to rerun the attack from my colleague host.
Paul, can you comment on the speed and performance of your virtualized environment versus what customers can expect out of the hardware?
Yeah, mileage varies. It all depends on the configuration in your policy. I work with many customers, and since they've gone to 6.2.2.2 and 6.2.3, the deployment has cut down from 50 to 60%. Now, I always erase mine, but if you go back in time to my deployments, it used to take me about 4 minutes, 5 minutes originally. It went down to 4, and now my deployments are actually under 1.5 minutes, right? So from my experience, it's also been down by 50 to 60%, as well as our customers, right? So it's still running. It'll probably run for another few more seconds, and it'll be done. We still have a few more minutes, guys. I know it's the top of the hour. It's 4 o'clock. If you guys want to stick around, we'll wrap things up. If you guys have any ideas of what you would like to see in a future session, please put that in the Q&A. Again, these are all going to be captured, and I'll tally this and figure out exactly what sessions to do for you guys. Again, we do this because we appreciate you're investing in Cisco security, and we want to make sure you're leveraging our products to the way they were intended. So let me go back to my Kali. This has deployed. So let me come here, go to Kali. Of course, it's going to prompt me to log back in. This is how secure it is. It kicks me out or locks the screen after just a bit of time. So this is, I'm going to rerun that same NICO command, targeting the same IP address, let that run, and I should go back and look at my intrusion policy. And if I've tuned my policy appropriately, it should not fire when it's targeting the .10 network, but what I'm actually going to do, the .10 IP, I should say, but actually I'm going to run another one to .11, and I'll actually see if that fires, right? All right, so let both run. As these are running, let me come back to my IPS policy. This will refresh in a few more seconds. Reload. Now, I might still see the impact flag 1 or 2, but it should not be for the rule that we just suppressed or did a pass rule action. And we'll see if anything triggers to 10.11, which is my server. Let me come back to Kali. And let's see if that's ran. It should have completed by now. Perfect. Test it. Good. So, oh, this is a static window, that's why. Let me go ahead and change this back and move it up in time. So time has moved since I last did this, so I'm going to come back here and make this up to 1603, which is where we're at. And apply. So now we're going to go from 0 to whatever comes up. So let's just wait for it to load. What do you think, Ryan? What do you think we're going to see? Well, that's not what I was expecting. Let's go back to Intrusion Events. And this is from what time? From 3:50 for 13 minutes. Okay. And actually, that rule's still fired. That should not have fired. But anyways, let's go back and look at. Actually, that did not fire. That is the .11. So the 10.10. I'm not seeing that impact flag 1 for 10.10 that we saw earlier. Are you seeing that, Ryan? So I did not tune out 10.11. I tuned out 10.10. So that rule did not fire, but it sure did for 10.11, right? That impact flag 1. And if I go back and change this for the last hour and not make it a static but a sliding window, that impact flag 1 from earlier should come back and populate, right, for the last hour. And when this refreshes, I should have a 10.10 impact flag 1, but from way earlier, before we actually tuned that up. There we go. There it is. You know, we covered a ton of stuff, Ryan. For the 50 people still with us, let's just recap what we actually did cover.
And Paul, before you do that, there was a comment from Larry, and I think this is a pretty good jump-off point to address his question. He talked about IDS instead of this being an IPS, being an IDS mode, and just wanted to kind of clarify for Larry that when it comes to impact flags, having impact flags for an IDS is even more critical, because you're not going to be able to stop those attacks. So now your security team or whoever it is that responds to an incident needs to get involved right away when you have an impact flag of 1 on a system that's just pulling in as an IDS.
Spot on, buddy. Right. And again, my policy was in IDS mode, so this is why none of these actually dropped the packet, right? It just has would have dropped, which is very, very key to your point, Ryan. So let me do this real quickly, guys. We did cover exactly the discovery policy. We set up, reviewed a host profile, built an intrusion policy, looked at variable sets, leverage recommendations. Now that we had discovery and within the recommendations within the intrusion policy, configured Nmap instance and remediation, created a correlation policy and a rule, leveraged that remediation, triggered an impact flag 1, tuned the rule, went back, reran that same traffic from the Kali host, and it did not trigger. So we were able to suppress that to that specific host. With that, I have nothing further. If there are any questions, please post them in the Q&A. And if you guys think of anything from a topic perspective that you would like to cover, please let us know. We'll figure out where we're going to be putting these recordings, and we will share that with everyone. Thank you for your time. Have yourself a fantastic rest of your Friday and a wonderful weekend, guys, until 3 weeks from now. So if you want to register for the session in 3 weeks, it'll be focusing around security intelligence, focusing around AMP for endpoint, AMP for networks, correlating that, triggering responses, and doing a root cause analysis when it comes to doing forensics for malware. So stay tuned for that one, as well as the next one, which will be a deep dive specifically to IPS.
And Paul, I got to say, I am extremely impressed that you did this all live demo and it all worked. So kudos for that.
Why would it not work? It's a controlled. It's my home environment. It's my home lab. I've got access to all these VMs, and I would not be doing demos being recorded if this would not work.
the demo gods have smiled on you today. That's awesome.
Indeed, they have. And it's not like I prepped for this, because I just got off the plane around 11 o'clock this morning. I was traveling all this week, so not much prep time either.
Nice, nice. Well, I think we got everything on the Q&A. I'll go back to it just to make sure. Is there anything we didn't cover already? I think we have everything.
Perfect.
We do have a recommendation in the chat or in the Q&A for future sessions.
Oh, perfect. Yes, yes. Anything you guys want to see in future sessions, let us know.
And I put a recommendation in the chat room for those of you guys who haven't seen that already. If you'd like some of this material, Will Young has a great session on FMC Deep Dive on Cisco Live Online. That also goes through some of this stuff as well. Also an excellent.
Yeah, that was a great one, but I would argue it's not as good as mine.
Oh, I didn't go that far, Paul.
No, I'm just kidding. No, it's really good. I'm just kidding. All right, guys, so with that, we're going to stop the recording, and hopefully we'll see you guys in 3 weeks from now. If you guys have any other comments, you should all have my email. When you're registered, please shoot me an email. All right, buddy, you can feel free to kill the recording. Appreciate all your help, man.
Anytime.